Welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host. And on this episode, I'm thrilled to have Ryan Noonan on the show. He is the sports betting manager at 4for4. He is also the co-host of the Move the Line podcast. Ryan, welcome to the show.
And it's a pleasure. I appreciate it. I love the show, love the newsletter. So to be here is really cool. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. And we're gonna talk about the newsletter, and I appreciate your contributions. But first, this podcast is brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting newsletter. Looking for some action on any given weekend? This is the free service for you, as 5 Nugget Saturday is my curated list of tips and analytics, and I curate tips from sharp people like Ryan Noonan. To sign up for free, go to thepowerrank.com. That is my site for better sports betting information through analytics. That's thepowerrank.com. Ryan, you are 62.5% on tackle props over the last 2 seasons. I asked you for a tackle prop for 5 Nugget Saturday a couple weeks ago, and I was actually just blown away by your analysis and the depth to which you look for information and how you do this. First of all, how did you decide to do tackle props? And then what's your process for analyzing and handicapping them?
Yeah, it was almost as a bit, to be honest, when it first started. It was last season, the start of last season, the prop market has just kind of evolved. When we first started doing this, Connor and myself, Connor Allen, who I do Move the Line with, we've been doing this for 6 years, mostly started sides and totals. And then, prop market really was something that both of us with a fantasy background got into. And then, I don't want to say it was like super easy to just print, but it kind of was. Like the prop market was very soft. If you had really good projections, you had a good process, a good understanding of, how teams and games can go with the way that offenses can interact and such, that the prop market was really soft. And then, as I think it's just as we've had more states expand and more people in the space, and I think the prop market and books have got sharper with setting lines, and I just wanted to look into other ways to find edges. And I just never saw anyone really getting into it. You had some like rollover from like the fantasy IDP community, but I thought like a lot of the way that they were looking at things was just kind of old and, tackle percentage. And there wasn't really anything that seemed to be pulling anything that was really meaningful from the offensive ways that we do props. So I thought there was an opportunity to kind of look into things, right? Looking at the prop market, there's more tabs out there. So what are we not clicking into to see that we can bet in? And then our processes really just kind of continue to evolve and feel like there's an opportunity where like we're going to have wins and losses. I think that there's no chance that, and this sounds borderline arrogant and somewhat like crazy, I just don't think that the books have better numbers than I do. And that doesn't mean that we can't, lose. Sometimes it happens, right? They still have to go out and play the games. You can't have the prop menu that these books offer and have the amount of time that I spend specifically on one niche market. You can't. I mean, they could, but I don't believe that they do have better numbers. So I think there's a lot of different ways to, look into, the way that the tackles come. And there's a subjective layer to it that's very different than a binary prop. Right? Someone either hits or doesn't hit their receiving reception number, right? We know that. We all watch it. We all can see. We can look at the box score. But the way that tackles are actually credited, there's a little subjectivity to it too. So I think there are other areas that we can find edges to be able to sharpen the best number. So, and part of it too is our community at 4for4 absolutely fell in love with it. And that just kind of forced me to lean into it a little bit more to make sure that we are absolutely crushing and taking advantage of a really soft market.
You said so many things that I think are so interesting. First of all, the fact that the community likes it. I think when you are looking at, more of the recreational type bettors, maybe not the pros that are getting 5 to 10 grand down on a game, I don't really think they care what they bet on, whether it's a side, total, prop. You want some excitement, you want to win, and I think you are serving them with props. I've done that as well with my interception props this year. I think people really like it. In terms of your process, you mentioned the 2 things that I thought were really awesome about the analysis that you sent over. First, not just looking at what's going on the defensive side of the ball and percentage of tackles and yada, 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 which is probably how this stuff is getting priced, right? But actually looking at how many plays the opposing offense is going to run, right?
Yeah, so there are so many things. I come to the way that it's evolved. I basically set a baseline. I have a baseline projection for a player based off of historical tackle rates. Kind of a rolling 3-year average. It's weighted more to this year because obviously teams systems change and things like that. So I want to wait kind of what's happening currently. But we were obviously at the start of the season dealing, as we are always going to do in football analytics, we're dealing with such small samples. So you have to make sure you're accounting for some variance and some noise in there. So I think just setting a baseline number based off of projected plays, but it's also a matter of like tackle opportunities. And that somewhat breaks people's brains when you think about Miami, right? They run a decent amount of plays. They're towards the middle to the bottom of the league, but not the actual bottom. But in terms of like actual tackle opportunities, they're pretty low because a lot of plays end up with Tyreek Hill catching the ball and running out of bounds. So even though they ran a play, they don't actually provide a ton of tackle opportunities because they actually, they're not running off guard, off tackle, and things of that nature. So, filtering that in as well. And you think of like the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns, you think of all of that we've had offensively with that team. We are on their fourth quarterback. They all, for the most part, have been pretty poor. Right? We could talk about Deshaun Watson as a player long term or whatnot, but it hasn't been a great offensive season for Cleveland. Cleveland runs by far the most plays per game offensively almost every week, and significantly above anyone else in the league. And part of that is because their defense is so good. They just turn teams over so quickly, 3-and-out, that puts their offense back on the field. So even though it's not like a high level offense, the 49ers are like the inverse. The 49ers do not run a lot of plays. So even though they're like an elite offense, they score quickly. They don't grind you down. So factoring that in, tackles above average that teams provide, that is an additional thing that goes into the baseline. And then we also have traditional position versus team stuff like we would have in terms of fantasy. You talk about like, oh, this team gives it up to tight ends, or this is a great place to attack running back props because this team does this. Well, that happens in terms of tackles as well. You think about how the Baltimore Ravens, for instance, Baltimore likes to run the football and they throw over the middle of the field at a higher rate than anyone else. So that works really well for linebacker and safety tackles, right? Because that's where a lot of Baltimore plays end. And then you get into the scorekeeper piece where, like I talked about it briefly, like, so assists in our game don't matter. They count the same. So when you're betting on tackle and assist props, it doesn't matter. They are weighted the same. Whereas old school IDP fantasy, I think those guys, I've never played. I've never played. I have no interest in ever playing, which I think, blows people's mind as well. But like they really want like solo tackles. I think those are like more points in fantasy games. It doesn't matter for us. So you have to look at, there's some places where historically, because there could be some noise and variance, but at the tails, anytime we're looking at large, small sample of data, I think looking at the tails of outcomes, I think can be a little bit telling. So, I have 3 years tracked by hand assist rates for all these home stadiums, and a place like LA for the Chargers, they're consistently significantly below average, 10-15% below average in their assist rate that they hand out. A place like Indy, a place like Carolina, they give out assists at a crazy rate, almost 10% above average, almost, more than half the tackles that happen in that game. So accounting for those things, I think is super important. I didn't really know at first how to like put an actual number to that. But I feel like in my process this year, I've accounted for that in a proper way other than just like, oh, I'm going to give this guy a mental bump. I now actually have a number that can quantify the edge there. So I feel like the numbers are even sharper than they've ever been.
That's incredible. You can just get the assist stuff from NFL.com though, right? Like you don't have to actually
Correct.
watch every game. Okay.
No, correct. Yeah. And then you just filter out, tackle, assist rate in a game.
Right.
Yeah, you can get all that stuff from NFL.com. ESPN's pretty terrible because they're
They
live
are.
scoring. They account for like they account for like special teams tackles and stuff like that, which are not what the books are accounting for. We're talking about actual
Right. Right.
offensive
Right.
defensive snaps.
And that's obviously very important. You gave us Jordan Fuller, I think it was over 5.5 tackles plus assists. You provided the excellent context about the Rams score gives more assists, and it was pretty interesting watching that game. I turned it on towards the end, flip open ESPN, which is usually a pretty good place to track stats that I'm looking for. So it's pretty easy to look up, quarterback interceptions, which is actually kind of harder on Yahoo for whatever reason. But you go and you look, and Fuller's got 5 tackles. Great. How many assists does he have? Well, it doesn't say. So I'm watching the game. I flip open NFL.com. I was like, oh, well, there we go. Okay, he's got 0 assists. And towards the end of the game, he he kind of gets in on a tackle late. I think it was a running play or whatnot. And you're like, oh, is that an assist? Is that an assist? And it took a while. It took a while for NFL.com to update it, right? And for it to finally been like, yep, there it goes. And so it went over, and it was a winner for everyone that looked at it in 5 Nugget Saturday. So so it's an interesting kind of sweat, right?
It is. It is an interesting sweat, and you do have the occasional, because again, it's subjective. You do have the occasional scorekeeper adjustment that happens where all of a sudden a tackle got taken away, and you're like, that doesn't make sense. Like, it either happened or it didn't. It's like picking up a flag. Like, you either saw the penalty or you didn't. But it is definitely a different sweat. It breaks your brain. It is the majority of my action on a Sunday at this point. More so than size and totals, definitely more so than any offensive props. So, like, you're watching a game and you're like, you want we're in that game, like, you want Matthew Stafford to go 3 and out, like, get Flacco back in the field. I need another tackle. But definitely exactly. Changes the way you watch the game. But I think it's interesting. I'll be honest. Like, I feel like it has improved my overall knowledge of the game in general, because I feel like I have an even better feel for defenses, how they interact with offenses. So I feel like it does help with size and totals as well, just because I think I have a better understanding of totality of what I'm watching.
Excellent. Let's get back to that in a sec. But first, I wanted to ask you if there is a bet that you'd be willing to share your process on.
Yeah, I have a couple this morning. And so these, part of the issue with tackle props, and I think people will say this with any prop, but even more so because these are so, they're not bet into as heavily, right? So they are very, very fickle markets, and very lucky that what we've built at 4for4 is a pretty massive following and group of people that love to bet these. And when I push out an official play, I have to give it a little bit of time before I even bet it myself. I let the subscribers get at it for a little bit because the lines move so quickly. But I haven't given any of these out. I have not bet these myself. I have not given these out to subscribers yet as well, because they do move quickly. And I always do try to give a playable range in my projections. I have sims, I have an EV calculator. So I have an understanding of like what I could play it up to, what I would recommend, where I still see significant edge in terms of playable EV. So that's a factor for us too, because I do think, liquidity is an issue for people. And I always want to make sure we have multiple outs as well. We'll not play a single book opener for these. We want to make sure, like, typically DraftKings, Caesars, MGM, ESPN. I know some of those books can be problematic for people. You can't really get down on MGM or ESPN or Barstool, whatever it was before. But Caesars and DraftKings, for the most part, you can get down a pretty good amount. You can get these on, prop builders and stuff like that too. So I'll start. My first one here for you is Rayshon Jenkins, safety for the Jags. I'm going to play over 5.5 tackles and assists here. This is plus money. Actually, all these plays are plus money, which I love.
Awesome.
Plus 110 on DraftKings. You can get this plus 104 on Caesars. Pretty massive shift in how Jacksonville has used Jenkins in the last couple of weeks. And it's been outstanding for his tackle production. Early in the season, he's a safety. And we will look at safety for tackle projection. We like to look at how often they're playing snaps in the box. Obviously, it just makes more sense. Intuitively, when you think line up closer to the line of scrimmage, you're going to put yourself in better position to get more tackle opportunities. And that's been a spike in Jenkins' production of late. His box snap rate over the last 4 weeks has not been less than 57%. If you get like 35, 40% for a safety, that's really good. We've even had like 72, 61 in the last couple of weeks for Jenkins. And that's translated into tackles. He has topped this mark in 3 straight. And every time he's played in a game this season against the team with an above average tackle against rate, he has topped this mark. Even when he was playing further back, playing more free safety stuff. So now we have Baltimore again, which you talked about earlier, one of the best spots for safeties in the league because of, again, they run a ton. We might have some weather in this game. And then they throw over the middle of the field again, even without Mark Andrews. Isaiah Likely is heavily involved. They're not afraid to operate over the middle of the field. And then, I have 25.4% of the tackles against Baltimore this season have come from safeties. That's the third highest rate in the league. So, and this I think is important too, not just looking at raw numbers, because that's kind of double counting for the play projection. Percentage of tackles and percentage above average, I think, is really important too. And then we look in the past 3 weeks, 5 safeties. Again, 3 weeks, 5 safeties have 6 or more tackles against the Ravens. So this is something that's been working for them as of late. Now we have also Jacksonville scorekeeper handing out assists, the 5th highest rate in the league. So it's in about 9.5% above league average. So that's a pretty significant bump there too. So I have Jenkins for 6.7 here. I'd play this up to 5.5 minus 120, but we're getting it at plus 110. So another one I have for you, and this is a little untraditional. I don't talk and touch too much on interior defensive linemen. There's a lot of variance, I think, in there too. But you have a handful of interior defensive linemen where they're actually a little bit, they're better players, and they're names that you're familiar with. This is an interior defensive lineman that people know. DeForest Buckner for the Colts, over 4.5 tackles and assists. This is plus 114. On DraftKings, absolutely love this number. Teams skew fairly run heavy against the Colts. Only the Jets have a lower pass rate over expectation and more raw rushing attempts against on the season than Indy. Part of that is, there's a lot of plays in Indy, but the pass rate over expectation stuff I think is telling as well. And we've seen, no surprise, the new play callers in Pittsburgh are not wanting to put the game in MVP Mitch's hands. They are running at a very high rate. They are 31st in pass rate over expectation over the past month. The past 2 starts for Mitch, 35% pass rate over expectation and 47%. They are running the ball very, very heavily. And on the season, Pittsburgh has been a place where you can get tackles for interior defensive linemen. It is the 2nd highest rate in the league. It's about 5% above league average. And Buckner is only one of 3 interior defensive linemen that has more than 60 tackles on the season. He has at least 6 in 4 straight. So 8, 6, 6, and 8. Now we get him in a great spot against a team that gives him up, and we're at 4.5 at plus money. Great, great spot. And then again, scorekeeper for the Colts for the last 3 years has been one of the best in the league. This season, 7th highest rate in the league. I think last year they were 2nd in assist rate. But again, a very generous, consistent. And then interior defensive linemen, they typically are in the mix, right? So like assists, we want a little bit more because there's a little bit more subjectivity into where that play is happening. So whereas like if I'm looking at a safety sometimes, or definitely corner, I like to go in the solo market because they don't typically get assists. We're paying for assists we don't need. So Buckner over 4.5 assists or tackles and assists, plus 114 on DraftKings. Absolutely love that one. Last one I'm going to give to you is, I love this play. I'm kind of dumbfounded by the line, but he has been underperformed a little bit of late. TJ Edwards, middle linebacker for the Bears, over 8.5 tackles and assists. Another plus money, plus 110 on DraftKings, plus 100 on Caesars. Well, Edwards failed last week, didn't get there for us, but the game state kind of changed a little bit. And this is, again, the great spot. We're up against the Browns. We really get a lot of tackle opportunities here. At least one linebacker has 10 tackles and assists and 5 straight against Cleveland. We have linebackers have topped this number in 11 of 13 games on the season, 13 linebackers overall in the season. And then Edwards himself, like this could be enough for the handicap. And I think if I was just starting this last year, this probably would have been enough for me. Edwards himself has topped this in 10 of 14 games, and we're getting this at plus money. But his baseline number for me is 10.3. And now we're getting the positive boost for the environment, scorekeeper, and the assists here as well. And, or the matchup too. No team gives up more tackles per game to linebackers than Cleveland. So TJ Edwards over 8.5 tackles and assists, plus 110 on DraftKings.
Awesome. Do you find that the tackle market tends to fluctuate more than it should? So Edwards has a low game and then all of a sudden you're getting a great price on him the next game?
Yeah, I think I've seen that more this season because they've been more consistent with posting. Last year, I wasn't running full projections early on, and I would like just earmark these guys. I'm like, I really like this guy. And we just would never get that game posted. Even like top of the line name, top of the leader board, tackle leaders, they wouldn't get posted. So now we're seeing more consistency through the books. They're posting more guys more often, and it feels very reactionary. in some instances, especially with some of the bigger name guys. It's like, oh, last week that guy only got us, 8. We've been hanging his line at 10.5. So like you'll see a line come down. So that happened a little bit last week with here with Edwards, where Edwards and most weeks early in the season we were at 10.5 pretty frequently. So to get him 8.5 plus money feels very reactionary to last game where the Lions really didn't get the ball as much. That game script kind of changed what we thought was happening. The Bears kind of controlled the game, and Detroit kind of out of their environment wasn't like leaning on the run like we maybe expected. And it was not a high performing tackle game for Edwards. So yeah, we're getting a little bit of reaction from the book, which is lovely.
I love it. You see that in interceptions all the time. The best example this season has been Jordan Love, who was priced at, maybe minus 160 to throw a pick, and then had 2 magical games before this last one, where he was actually incredible in terms of not putting the ball in dangerous positions, was absolutely incredible. But it was kind of unsustainable. So his price, I think it was plus money for him to throw a pick, or maybe minus 110 or something insane like that. And I think this is something I saw it a little bit in NBA player point props in the finals and the conference championships last year. I think it is a general characteristic of these player props until they get more sharp. And I think it's a telltale sign that there's an edge there.
Yeah, and that's it too, right? It can't react to, all right, this guy, especially the guy that let you down, right? He owes you money. we lost on Edwards last week. You can't not go back to Edwards because this is kind of a double whammy, to be honest. Like I loved Foye Oluokun, who's the linebacker for the Jags, in the same spot against Cleveland last week, and Oluokun came up short as well. So like it's double. Like I can't not go back just because Edwards himself failed and the Oluokun underperformed. Like his teammate got 11 tackles. We needed Oluokun to get 10. So he fell a little bit short of that, but like it's still a perfect spot in the game environment that we love. We're getting a great number. And if I'm not even giving him any bumps, just his baseline number is comfortably above this. So, and him himself, his hit rate is above this. So there's just enough there where it's like, okay, can't be prisoner of the moment like the books, then we're giving up our edge.
Absolutely. So Ryan, you mentioned before that in studying these props, you also find that you're giving yourself an edge in sides and totals. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think, sides of totals are so hard. And I really respect, we do our Move the Line, our Wednesday game preview show. It's myself, Connor Allen, and Sharp Clark, who, I have a lot of respect for someone that just decides that they want to make a choice to go head on into the sharpest, most liquid market that's out there. I have a lot of respect for that. It is crazy life choice. But yeah, I think it's not that I feel like I have a massive edge. I think I feel like I see and understand the game a little bit more because I'm thinking more in terms of what's going on the defensive side. And I know sometimes, year over year defensive performance and obviously week over week defensive performance can be a little bit noisy. We find that it's obviously less sticky than, offensive production. But I think I'm just accounting for it in a way that's, I think, a little bit more than the average person that's doing this. Probably not more than the average person in Clark's instance, or someone that's a professional bettor and is betting sides and totals at volume and for 6 figures and stuff like that. But I think it's helped. I think it's made me a little bit more cognizant about picking my spots and thinking more along the lines of how teams and games interact and offensive interact. And I think more so in terms of totals and thinking about those things because I'm thinking about play volume. I'm thinking about, this instance, how this play volume can be affected, thinking about ranges of play volumes and how that can transpire and things can play out differently. So I think it just is, instead of being, hey, I'm thinking about offense, I'm thinking about fantasy football. Now I'm going to bet games. I think that's definitely a recipe for losing. So I think having just a better understanding of both sides of the ball helps a lot.
Absolutely. Ryan, would like to know more about your overall story. How did you get into the sports betting world originally?
Yeah, I was betting. Well, I remember being like 11 and 12, and I had my friend's dad come home from like the bar with the sports betting card, and like he's like, "Hey," he'd hand me the card and be like, "You know a lot about football. I'll just like check the games. I'm picking games for this degenerate from the the Elks Club when I'm not even a teenager." And I just started betting football a little bit when I was in college. You know, we'd go over to Western Union in the morning on a Sunday and pretend I knew who I was sending money to in the Cayman Islands, and go back home and see that the money was in my account. And just, at that time, it wasn't really props or betting sides and totals. And, I'd bet a couple, throw in $200, and I bet like 3 or 4 2-leg parlays, and all the stuff that, amateurs get started in doing. And I just really loved it. I love anything speculation wise. I've always loved, the analytical side of things. Now we've had this analytical boom, obviously, over the last 20 years or so, at least on the sports side. Always loved it on the baseball side. It's just such an individual team sport where you can really, get into the weeds on that. And I started like writing for baseball content and football content on the fantasy side. I was writing for Sporting News for a while. I was doing that on DraftKings because they have a content leg of things. You're writing DFS content when those games were, something that they probably hadn't been solved yet, and we hadn't opened up sports betting. But as soon as we did, that was when it was like, oh, this is what I really care about, what I want to do. Now we have access to it, and I'm in Illinois and Chicago. It's like, okay, well, Chicago and Illinois politics, they got a lot wrong, but we got sports betting right pretty early, which is a great thing. And then, a few years ago, met up with, we had a local Chicago industry meetup situation, people that were in the fantasy community, people that were in the sports community. That's where I met Connor Allen, and Connor and I became, fast friends that whole rest of the season. I think that was 2016. We would just text, what do you like this week? We were betting on games. And then that off season, we talked about starting a show, starting, to put maybe some content together. And that's kind of how it started. And then we got brought on to 4for4, which has been kind of an OG in the fantasy space for, 20 years or so, about 5 years ago now. And we came on to bring a betting leg to the offering, and been really excited about what we've built and grown there. We have a great community. Our Discord is one of my favorite places to be on a Sunday when I have time. Community absolutely loves sweating tackles. Like, no offense to Connor, no offense to Clark. No one in there is sweating sides. No one's sweating offensive props on a Sunday. Everyone is watching and arguing about an assist that someone should have had, or trying to get the ball back for the other team so they can get their defender on the field. We are sweating tackles nonstop, and it's a great place to be. So just very happy and proud of what we've built, and it's a great place to be in. Feel very, very lucky and blessed to be in a spot where I get paid to do this and talk about this for a living. It's a great place to be.
That's very cool that people are sweating the tackle prop so much. It's a cumulative type stat, right? So you can kind of watch it accumulate and argue about whether that was an assist or whatnot. I've been betting a lot of interception props, and it's hit or miss, right? I can turn off that Packers game as soon as Love throws that interception. I actually missed it. I forget what I was doing. But yeah, that's an interesting thing because, do you find you're doing more overs or unders, or how does that usually break down?
Yeah, so originally when I was doing it, because there's no sweat worse than an under tackle. It is just a painful watch. You're like, get this guy off the field, get him out of there.
Injury. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, yeah, it's
true. I would never root for an injury.
Yeah, we had one the other day, actually. Nate Landman, the linebacker for the Falcons, was his playing time had gone down, but he was still getting projected for, I guess the line that the books were putting was basically, close to 100% snaps. And I was like, well, we got to take advantage of this. And he got off to a hot start a couple weeks ago against the Jets. I'm like, oh no, I need to get him off the field. And he did get hurt. So I think we were under 7.5, and he got to 5 early in the third quarter, but did get injured. And that was, that's, just like any prop, right? You should take it. It's part of the line. Like, that's a win in the unders. So the way I was originally building projections was I was building pretty conservative play volume plays. So if I had a guy, because, hey, look, we're having more fun betting the overs here. If a guy is still popping as a value and way over when I'm conservatively projecting play volume, then it was like, I feel like this is a massive edge for us. If I'm a little bit more in terms of what their average is, closer to what I think this game environment is, because I'm looking at plays that the team runs, and then also like how many plays against does the other team have, and factoring in, recent form, multiple years of averages with that, as long as it's the same coordinator and system and stuff like that. So I've bumped that up a little bit, and I'm accounting for it in different ways. So we're betting more unders than we were earlier, but it's a mix where there's volume. Or we can get down and there's an edge. That's where we'll play. So even the plays that I don't bet on Sunday morning after inactives have gone through and I've updated all my numbers, I share the top EV plays in our Discord. So here's all that the projections love. Knock yourself out. So even if it's something that I didn't find value in or I didn't want to bet necessarily, I share them with our subscribers so they have access to all those plays. And multiple times earlier this season, people would be like, "Hey, are you betting all these unders?" Because the unders are hitting at a pretty high rate. So we've bumped up the unders as well.
Fascinating. Ryan, would like to end the show with one potentially non-sports question. What has moved you recently? Give me a recommendation, whether it's a book, movie, podcast, whatever.
Not a lot of time for movies or TV in season.
What? You don't have time during football season? Come on, man.
I know none of us do, right? And again, like I also am not complaining. Like that's one of my pet peeves is people like get to do what we do and complain about how busy they are. We're busy. People that are listening to this that have other day jobs are busy as well. Very, very grateful for what I get to do. But yeah, I love to speculate on golf as well. So golf season kicks off here soon. So there's never really a lot of time. I did read a book recently, or finished a book. I had started it and then I didn't get time to it and went back and reread it. It is Game Changers. It's from Dave Asprey, who's kind of a quirky bird. Dave Asprey is the guy that started Bulletproof Coffee, Bulletproof Diet.
Oh, right. Yeah.
He's a very interesting character. Is not lacking for self-worth and volume, and that comes across in the book, and that's okay. But part of it is he has a Bulletproof podcast as well. A lot of it's like interviewing really successful people in business and life. And basically part of it was he would ask at the end of an episode, what are 1 to 2 things that you would give to someone now that would help them be successful. So it's basically like a self-help, biohacking, life hacking type of book where it's like, here are these successful people, here's their advice. And he's kind of, brought it all together, and here's some simple things that no matter where you are in your lot in life that you could probably do. A big takeaway for me is the gratitude piece. It's like, hey, just understanding and being thankful for what you have, and the people that are around you, the relationships, the community that you've built. I think having gratitude and perspective, I think, is really important. Keeps you grounded. It's a really important piece for me, and just understanding what I have to do every day to make sure that we can move forward in the best way, regardless of what's going on around me in the circumstance. I can control that part of my mindset. And I think the book was a good reminder of that. Now there's all sorts of other, ayahuasca type stuff that I'm sure Aaron Rodgers would appreciate in biohacking. And I think it's interesting for some. Some people will probably roll their eyes at some of it, but I thought it was a really interesting book from a very interesting character.
Awesome. I think gratitude is crucially important, especially for people like you and me that get to do what we love for a living. Asprey is also like a meditation guy, right?
He is. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yep. It's a big piece of it.
Awesome. You made me think of that because I try to think about gratitude when I meditate, but if I think about anything at all. Ryan Noonan, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast and being so generous with your prop bets. Please let everyone know where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find the podcast, Move the Line, wherever you listen to podcasts. So the 4for4 Bets YouTube channel. You can find me on X, Twitter, whatever we're calling it these days, at Ryan Noonan.
Awesome. And you guys have a subscription service as well at 4for4?
We do, massively discounted right now because we're towards the tail end of the season. But we have an NBA team that's pushing out NBA bets all the time. You can take advantage of that. It's 4for4.com/plans. Super duper cheap right now. It's like $59 for the rest of the season, which is basically like, buy a month, get 2 free, because it takes you through the end of February. And then our system starts back up in March to get the full year. We start, betting at that time in March. We're, getting into the draft props and all those things. Futures start pretty soon thereafter. So definitely worth checking out. And if you do anything in the football speculation space, fantasy, DFS, best ball, and then obviously betting, the betting sub gets you access to all of it.
Awesome. Thanks again, Ryan.
Thanks,
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host. Just a reminder, you can get 5 Nuggets Saturday, my free sports betting newsletter. Check that out at thepowerrank.com.